The patrol car rolled slowly behind him, headlights pressing into the back of his sedan like an accusation that hadn't yet found words. The road was empty, suburban quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every movement feel watched. Daniel Carter noticed the cruiser the way trained men always do, not with panic, not with irritation, but with awareness. He checked his speed. 42 in a 45. Signal intact. No reason. Still, the lights came on. Red. Blue. Final. Daniel exhaled once, long and controlled, and pulled over beneath a street lamp that flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive. He shut off the engine. Windows down. Hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The way he'd been taught. The way he'd taught others. This wasn't his first stop. It wasn't even his 10th. But it felt different the moment the officer stepped out of the cruiser. Daniel didn't need to see the face to know. He felt it in the pause, the extra beat before footsteps approached. In the way the officer's hand rested on his belt, not relaxed, not casual, ready. The officer stopped just behind the driver's door, not beside it. Tactical, aggressive, intentional. License and registration, the officer said. No greeting, no explanation. Daniel turned his head slowly. Of course, officer. Before I move, may I ask why I was stopped? The officer leaned forward slightly, peering into the car like he expected to find something dirty hiding in plain sight. You fit a description. Daniel's jaw tightened. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that it registered in his mind. Fit a description. That phrase had followed him his entire life like a shadow that never quite disappeared. What description would that be? Daniel asked calmly. The officer's eyes flicked over Daniel's face, his jacket, the interior of the car. Clean. Professional. No smell. No clutter. No excuses. That seemed to irritate him. Step out of the vehicle. There it was. The pivot. The moment where a stop became something else. Daniel paused. Not because he was afraid, but because he was calculating. He had spent 16 years in federal service. He had been trained to read rooms, men, silence. He knew escalation when he heard it. I'm happy to comply, Daniel said, voice steady. Am I being detained? The officer straightened. Step out of the vehicle. Daniel opened the door slowly and stepped onto the asphalt. The night air was cold, sharp against his skin. He kept his hands visible, fingers spread slightly, palms open. He stood tall, not defiant, not submissive, just present. The officer circled him like a man inspecting a purchase he hadn't yet decided to make. Flashlight beam cut across Daniel's chest, lingered on his face, dropped to his waist. Where are you coming from? The officer asked. Work. What kind of work? Daniel hesitated for half a second. He knew the answer would change the trajectory of a night. He also knew that lying, even by omission, would eat at him. I'm a federal agent. The officer laughed. Not a chuckle, a sharp, dismissive sound. Sure you are. Daniel reached slowly into his jacket, stopping when the officer's hand twitched toward his weapon. I have identification, Daniel said carefully. In my inside pocket. How would you like me to retrieve it? The officer's face hardened. Don't reach for anything. I'm not, Daniel replied. I'm telling you where it is. The flashlight snapped up to Daniel's eyes, blinding him for a second. The officer stepped closer, too close, invading space deliberately. You people always have a story, the officer said. Always some badge, some excuse. Daniel felt something old stir in his chest. Not anger, not fear, fatigue. The kind that comes from realizing no amount of credentials could outrun skin. I can call my supervisor, Daniel said. We can clear this up. The officer's lips curled slightly. You're not making calls right now. The handcuffs came out faster than logic. Metal glinting under the street lamp. Cold certainty. For what reason am I being detained? Daniel asked. Suspicion, the officer replied. You're acting nervous. Daniel almost laughed. Almost. The cuffs snapped shut around his wrists, tighter than necessary. The click echoed louder than it should have in the quiet street. Daniel felt the familiar burn of steel against skin, but what cut deeper was the absurdity. He had carried a firearm in the line of duty for over a decade. He had stood between threats and civilians. He had worn the flag on his shoulder. And here he was, handcuffed on an empty road for existing. The officer guided him roughly toward the cruiser. "You mind telling me why a federal agent is driving around this neighborhood so late?" the officer asked. Daniel looked up at the night sky, then back at the officer. "Because I live here." That answer seemed to enrage him. The officer shoved Daniel in the back seat, ignoring the way his head clipped the door frame. The door slammed shut with finality. Inside the cruiser, Daniel sat upright, breathing evenly, counting seconds. He knew one truth above all others. This situation would only end one of two ways: quietly swept under the rug, or very loudly. He leaned forward as much as the cuffs allowed. "Officer," he said through the partition, "I am requesting a supervisor and making a formal statement. I'm also requesting to place a call." Silence. Then the radio crackled to life. The officer stepped away, voice low-coded. Daniel caught fragments. "Uncooperative. Claims federal. No ID verified." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought of his father, who had taught him how to speak carefully in public. Of his mother, who had taught him when silence was safer than truth. Of the academy instructors who told him the badge would protect him. He thought of how wrong they had been. Minutes passed. Then more. The officer returned, face set, jaw tight. He opened the back door and leaned in close. "Last chance," the officer said. "You tell me the truth right now, or this gets worse." Daniel met his eyes. Calm, unyielding. "I'm telling you the truth," he said. "And I'm about to make a phone call that will change your night." The officer snorted. "Yeah? To who?" Daniel swallowed once. "The FBI." That was the moment the night cracked open. The officer stepped back, laughter gone, replaced by something else, uncertainty. He turned away, pacing, muttering. Then, reluctantly, he pulled a phone from his pocket and held it up. "Make it quick," he said. Daniel took the phone with cuffed hands, fingers clumsy but controlled. He dialed a number he knew by heart. Not because he used it often, but because he never wanted to forget it. One ring. Two. Then a voice on the other end, sharp and alert. "This is Special Agent Morales." Daniel spoke clearly, every word measured. "This is Agent Daniel Carter. I've been detained by local law enforcement without cause. I need supervisory intervention immediately." There was a pause. Then the tone shifted. "Where are you, Daniel?" Daniel gave the location. "Stay where you are," Morales said. "Do not say another word. We're making calls." Daniel handed the phone back. The officer took it slowly, eyes narrowed. "You think that scares me?" Daniel didn't answer, because he knew what was coming. And so did the night. The cruiser sat idling under the street lamp, engine humming like it was impatient for resolution. Inside the back seat, Daniel felt the cold creep in, not from the air but from the waiting. Waiting was the most dangerous part. Waiting gave fear room to invent outcomes. Waiting gave power to the wrong people. The officer stood outside the vehicle now, radio pressed to his shoulder, voice lowered but tense. His posture had changed. The confidence from earlier was gone, replaced by rigid calculation. He wasn't angry anymore. He was thinking, and that worried Daniel more than anger ever could. Daniel stared straight ahead through the windshield, eyes unfocused. He knew the script well enough to predict the next few moves. First, denial. Then, justification. Then, if things went badly, containment. The system didn't panic when it was exposed. It closed ranks. A second patrol car arrived, tires crunching softly against the curb. Then a third. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on one by one, curiosity blooming behind curtains. Phones appeared. Someone was recording. Daniel noticed the subtle shift in the air the moment witnesses entered the equation. Accountability hated an audience. The officer who had stopped him, Officer Mark Reynolds, according to the name stitched on his uniform, walked back toward the cruiser, face tight, jaw clenched. He opened the back door again. "You're being detained until this gets sorted," Reynolds said, tone suddenly formal. Controlled. "Do you understand?" Daniel looked at him evenly. "I understand you've already crossed several lines." Reynolds ignored that. He shut the door harder than necessary and walked away again, pacing near the hood of his car like a man trying to burn off a bad decision. Inside the cruiser, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He couldn't reach it. He didn't need to. He knew exactly who it was. The first call always went to local leadership. Quiet. Professional. No accusations. Just facts. The second call escalated. Jurisdiction, liability, federal interest. The third call, that one carried weight. 10 minutes later, an unmarked black SUV rolled silently onto the street and parked behind the patrol cars. No lights, no sirens, just presence. Reynolds saw it and froze. Two men stepped out. Dark jackets. No insignia on the back, but their posture said everything. Calm, purposeful, unrushed. Men who did not need to announce authority because they carried it with them. One of them approached Reynolds. "Officer Reynolds," the man said, flashing credentials briefly. "I'm Supervisory Special Agent Luis Morales. FBI." The word FBI hit the street like a dropped glass. Sharp, irreversible. Reynolds swallowed. "This is just a misunderstanding." Morales nodded once. "That's what we're here to determine." He gestured toward the cruiser. "Open the door." Reynolds hesitated, just long enough to make the wrong choice obvious. Then he moved. The door opened. Daniel stepped out slowly, wrists still cuffed. Morales' eyes flicked to the restraints and hardened. "Remove them," Morales said. Reynolds fumbled with the keys. His hand was shaking now. The cuffs came off with a metallic snap that sounded less like release and more like a verdict. Daniel rolled his wrists once, blood rushing back into his hands. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood beside Morales, shoulders squared. Morales turned to Reynolds. "You stopped a federal agent without probable cause. You detained him. You cuffed him. And you denied him access to counsel. Is that correct?" Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it. He was acting suspicious. Morales raised an eyebrow. "Define suspicious." Reynolds gestured vaguely. He wouldn't answer questions. He claimed to be federal. Morales nodded slowly. "And instead of verifying that claim, you escalated." "I was following procedure." Reynolds snapped, a flicker of defensiveness breaking through. Morales stepped closer. "No, you followed instinct, and your instinct was wrong." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Neighbors leaned closer. Phone stayed raised. The night had stopped pretending this was routine. A police sergeant arrived moments later, face already pale. He approached Morales with forced confidence. "We'll handle this internally," the sergeant said quickly. Morales looked at him, unimpressed. "No, you won't." The sergeant stiffened. "Excuse me. This incident now involves federal civil rights violations," Morales replied evenly. "It is no longer internal." Reynolds looked like he had been punched. "You can't do that." Morales didn't raise his voice. "We already did." Daniel finally spoke again, voice calm but carrying weight. "Officer Reynolds never informed me of the reason for my stop. He referenced a description without providing one. He escalated without cause. He used restraints without justification. And he made discriminatory remarks." Reynolds spun toward him. "That's a lie." Morales turned his head slowly. "Is it?" One of the other agents stepped forward, holding up a phone. "Body cam footage is uploading now." Reynolds' face drained of color. The sergeant tried again, softer this time. "Let's not rush to conclusions." Morales met his eyes. "This isn't rushing. This is overdue." An hour later, the street was quiet again, but nothing had returned to normal. Patrol cars were gone. Neighbors retreated indoors, buzzing with stories they would tell for years. Reynolds sat alone on the curb, head in his hands, staring at a future collapsing in real time. Daniel stood beside the black SUV, jacket pulled tight against the cold. Morales approached him quietly. "You okay?" Morales asked. Daniel nodded once. "I will be." Morales studied him. "You handled it well." Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I didn't have a choice." Morales' voice softened. "You never should have had to." As the SUV pulled away, Daniel looked back one last time. Reynolds didn't look up. He didn't need to. The damage was done. What Reynolds didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that this stop wouldn't end with a report. It would trigger audits, reviews, complaints that suddenly found traction, footage that wouldn't stay buried, a pattern that could no longer be ignored. One call hadn't just ended a shift. It had started a reckoning. The official language called it an administrative review, but everyone involved knew that was a lie. Reviews were quiet. Reviews were polite. Reviews stayed contained. This one didn't. By morning, Daniel Carter's name was already moving through channels that rarely spoke to each other. Internal affairs, civil rights units, legal departments, federal oversight committees. Not because Daniel demanded it. He didn't. He filed his statement, submitted the footage he'd been allowed to record discreetly on his own device, and went home. That alone unsettled people. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to perform outrage. He was precise. Precision scared institutions more than emotion ever could. Officer Mark Reynolds didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone, refreshing news feeds that hadn't yet mentioned his name, but already felt like they were closing in. His wife asked what was wrong. He told her it was paperwork. He told her it would blow over. He told her what he needed to believe. At 9:17 a.m., he got the call. Internal Affairs wanted him downtown. Immediately. Badge. Weapon. Body cam. The word weapon caught in his throat. At headquarters, Reynolds was escorted past colleagues who avoided his eyes. Not hostile. Worse. Careful. As if proximity alone could infect them. He noticed how doors closed more quietly than usual. How conversations died mid-sentence. How the building felt colder than it ever had. They sat him in a small room with a single table and 2 chairs. No coffee. No small talk. Just a recorder placed carefully between them, red light blinking like a warning. Officer Reynolds, the investigator said, voice neutral, "This interview is being recorded." Reynolds nodded. "You are under investigation for unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and potential civil rights violations." Reynolds leaned forward. "This is getting blown out of proportion." The investigator didn't react. "We'll decide that." They pressed play. Reynolds heard his own voice fill the room. Sharp. Dismissive. Words he'd said 100 times without consequence suddenly sounded different when stripped of context and ego. When isolated. When undeniable. "You people always have a story." Reynolds swallowed hard. "Can you explain what you meant by that statement?" the investigator asked. Reynolds hesitated. It wasn't meant racially. The investigator didn't argue. "Then what did you mean?" Silence stretched. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel sat in his living room with the blinds half open, sunlight cutting across the floor in long stripes. He hadn't gone into the office. Morales insisted he take the day. Daniel poured coffee he didn't drink and stared at a wall that felt suddenly unfamiliar. He had replayed the stop all night. Not the cuffs, not the shove, but the moment Reynolds said, "You people." That phrase didn't just accuse. It erased. It flattened a lifetime of complexity into a category Reynolds thought he understood. Daniel's phone buzzed. "Morales." They found prior complaints. Morales said without preamble. Daniel closed his eyes. "How many?" Morales exhaled. 6. Daniel opened his eyes slowly. "And traffic stops. Escalations. Verbal warnings from supervisors. All unsubstantiated." Daniel nodded. He wasn't surprised. He was tired of being unsurprised. "One of them involved a black military officer," Morales continued. "Another was a Latino schoolteacher. Same pattern. Same language." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And nothing happened." Morales didn't deny it. Until now. By afternoon, the department issued a statement. Carefully worded. Passive voice. No admissions. The officer has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Administrative leave didn't sound like consequences. It sounded like a pause button. Daniel knew the difference better than most. Then the footage leaked. It wasn't supposed to. It never was. But someone, somewhere, decided the truth moved faster in daylight. The video hit social media just after sunset. No commentary. No music. Just raw footage. The stop. The tone. The cuffs. The phrase. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Daniel watched it once. That was enough. He didn't read the comments. He didn't need to. He already knew the arguments people would make. He'd lived them. He should have complied more. We don't know what happened before the video. Not all cops. But there were other voices too. Louder than before. Sharper. Harder to dismiss. By midnight, Reynolds' name was public. His neighbors recognized the patrol car that didn't come home. His kids heard whispers at school. His wife stopped answering calls. The thin wall between professional action and personal consequence collapsed without ceremony. Reynolds sat alone in the dark, phone buzzing nonstop, unable to look at it. For the first time, he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Not anger, fear. The next morning, federal investigators arrived at the department with boxes. Not metaphorical ones. Actual boxes. Files were pulled. Emails printed. Supervisory notes reviewed. The pattern widened. What began as one stop became a map of decisions that had been ignored, minimized, rationalized. Daniel was called in to give sworn testimony. He wore a plain suit. No badge. No weapon. Just himself. "Why do you think this happened to you?" the attorney asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Because he saw me before he saw the law." The room went quiet. "And why do you think it escalated?" she pressed. Daniel met her eyes. "Because he believed he would be protected." That answer landed harder than any accusation. By the end of the week, administrative leave became suspension. Suspension became termination proceedings. The department resisted publicly. Privately, they were already preparing statements. Reynolds wasn't fired yet, but he could feel it coming. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to work. Same desk, same badge, same oath. But something had shifted. Colleagues treated him differently. Not with pity, but with a kind of respect that came from witnessing restraint under pressure. Morales stopped by his office late one evening. "You know this won't end cleanly," Morales said. Daniel nodded. "It never does." Morales studied him. "They'll try to settle." Quietly, Daniel looked up. "I won't." Morales raised an eyebrow. "This isn't about money," Daniel continued. "It's about record, about precedent, about making it harder for the next one to pretend they didn't know." Morales smiled slightly. "I figured you'd say that." Outside, protests began forming. Not violent, focused. Signs with Daniel's name beside words like accountability and enough. The department issued another statement. This one sounded defensive. The system had noticed something it hadn't expected. Daniel Carter wasn't going away, and neither was the evidence. The lawsuit landed like a controlled detonation. Precise, deliberate, impossible to ignore. It wasn't theatrical. It didn't reach for hyperbole. It laid out facts the way a surgeon lays out instruments, each one clean, sharp, and necessary. Unlawful stop. Unlawful detention. Violation of civil rights under color of law. Pattern of discriminatory conduct. Failure of supervision. Failure of the department. Daniel's name sat at the top of the filing, calm and unembellished. Beneath it, page after page of documentation. Timestamps. Transcripts. Prior complaints that had once been dismissed, now stitched together into something unmistakable. A pattern. The department's legal team knew it within minutes. They didn't say it out loud, but the silence in the room said enough. This wasn't a case to fight on principle. This was a case to contain damage. The chief called an emergency meeting. "We settle," one attorney said flatly. "Fast. Quiet." Another shook his head. "If we settle now, it looks like admission." The chief leaned back in his chair, eyes tired. "It already looks like admission." Across town, Daniel sat in a conference room with his own counsel, hands folded neatly on the table. He listened more than he spoke. When they suggested numbers, 7 figures, potentially more, he raised a hand. "I'm not here to negotiate silence," Daniel said. The room paused. His attorney cleared his throat. "Daniel, this kind of settlement won't change anything," Daniel finished. "It just makes the story disappear." He looked around the room, meeting each face. "I don't want this buried. I want it recorded." His attorney studied him carefully. "That will make this harder." Daniel nodded. "Good." Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds watched the news like a man watching a fire approach his house in slow motion. Every headline tightened the knot in his chest. Officer accused of racially motivated stop. Federal agent detained without cause. Department faces civil rights lawsuit. Friends stopped texting. Some blocked him outright. Others sent messages that sounded supportive but read like goodbyes. His union rep called. "They're distancing," the rep said bluntly. "This is bigger than we thought." Reynolds laughed bitterly. "You think?" The rep hesitated. "You should prepare for termination." Reynolds hung up without responding. At the department, the fractures widened. Officers whispered in hallways. Some defended Reynolds out of reflex. Others stayed quiet, afraid of being associated with the wrong side of history. Just a few, began talking about things they'd seen, things they'd ignored, things they'd told themselves were normal. Internal Affairs received 3 new complaints in 1 week, all unrelated on paper, all eerily familiar in tone. Daniel was called to testify again, this time before a federal civil rights panel. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters leaned forward like predators sensing blood. "Agent Carter," one panel member asked, "why pursue this publicly?" Daniel didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the panel. "Because silence is how patterns survive," he said. Another member leaned in. "Do you believe Officer Reynolds acted out of personal bias or institutional permission?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "Both." That answer rippled through the room. Outside, protesters gathered again, not in anger, but in resolve. Veterans stood beside teachers. Mothers stood beside students. People who had been stopped, questioned, humiliated, all recognizing something of themselves in Daniel's story. The department released another statement. This one was colder, legal, defensive. The officer's actions do not reflect department values. Daniel read it once and set it down. Values were easy to claim, harder to enforce. The termination hearing for Reynolds was scheduled for Friday. He didn't attend. Instead, he sat alone in his car outside the building, hands gripping the steering wheel, unable to bring himself to walk inside. For the first time in his career, no uniform hung ready. No radio crackled with purpose. No authority waited for him. Just consequences. Inside, the decision was swift. Termination approved. Cause cited. Badge revoked. Weapon surrendered. When the news broke, it wasn't dramatic. No sirens. No spectacle. Just a line in a report that ended a career built over years of unchecked confidence. Reynolds saw it on his phone. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he shut it off. Daniel found out an hour later. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet weight lifting from his chest, replaced by something heavier. Responsibility. Morales called that night. "It's done," Morales said. Daniel nodded to himself. For him, Morales hesitated. "You know this will follow you." Daniel looked out his window at the city lights. "I know, and you're okay with that?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Someone has to be." The lawsuit didn't end with Reynolds. It expanded. Policy reviews, federal oversight, mandatory retraining, supervisors called to account. Some resisted. Others resigned quietly. The department changed, not enough, not fast, but visibly. And Daniel kept working. Same badge, same oath, different gravity. Because one call hadn't just ended a career. It had forced the system to look at itself. And in the reflection, it no longer recognized the excuses it used to believe. The world moved on faster than Daniel expected. It always did. A new scandal replaced his within days. Another video, another name, another argument recycled through the same tired channels. The hashtags faded. The panels stopped calling. The cameras packed up and chased the next outrage. Public attention was never justice, it was weather. But consequences didn't fade with attention. They settled, quietly, permanently. Daniel felt it first at work. Nothing overt, no hostility, no punishment, just subtle shifts. Conversations that paused when he entered the room. Meetings he was no longer invited to. Assignments that went to someone else for now. The system didn't retaliate loudly. It isolated softly. He had expected backlash. What he hadn't expected was loneliness. Men and women he had trusted, people who had once told him he did the right thing, now avoided prolonged eye contact. They were not bad people. They were cautious people. And caution, Daniel learned, was often just fear wearing professional clothes. One evening, Morales joined him at a quiet bar near the office. No press, no uniforms, just 2 men nursing drinks they didn't really want. "You're paying a price," Morales said plainly. Daniel nodded. "I knew I would." Morales studied him. "Any regrets?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He watched the bartender wipe down the counter with the kind of repetition that suggested muscle memory, not thought. "I regret that it had to be me," Daniel said finally. "I don't regret what I did." Morales leaned back. "That's the difference. Across town, Mark Reynolds packed boxes in silence. No ceremony, no goodbye, just cardboard and tape and the dull thud of personal items removed from a locker that no longer belonged to him. He avoided mirrors. When he didn't, he barely recognized the man staring back. He had told himself a story for years, that he was firm, not biased, cautious, not cruel, professional, not personal. That story had protected him, until it didn't. Now he had time. Too much of it. Time to replay the stop. The tone. The moment he decided Daniel was a problem instead of a person. Time to wonder how many other moments he had justified the same way. Accountability didn't come with closure. It came with questions. Daniel's lawsuit concluded months later. Not quietly, but thoroughly. Consent decrees. Policy changes. Oversight committees with teeth. The department fought some provisions, conceded others. Progress came in inches, not miles. Daniel testified one last time. "What do you want the outcome of this case to be?" the judge asked. Daniel didn't speak about punishment. He spoke about prevention. "I want the next officer to hesitate," he said. "I want the next supervisor to intervene. I want the next report to be taken seriously." That's it. The ruling reflected that restraint. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked him if he considered himself a hero. Daniel shook his head. "I consider myself tired." That answer didn't make headlines. It was too honest. Months passed, then a year. Daniel transferred divisions, not because he was forced to, but because he needed distance. New city, new rhythm, same mission. He mentored younger agents now, teaching them things that weren't in manuals. How power feels when it's misused. How silence enables patterns. How one call can change lives, yours included. Sometimes, late at night, he still thought about the stop, not with anger, with clarity. He understood something then that he hadn't before. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't fast. It wasn't satisfying. It was costly and necessary. Daniel never spoke to Reynolds again. He didn't need to. Their lives had intersected once, violently, and then diverged forever. That was enough. The street lamp where it all began was replaced the following year. New light. Same road. Cars still passed. People still drove home, believing the rules would protect them. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they weren't. But now, because one man refused to stay quiet, the cost of getting it wrong was higher than it used to be. And that quietly, imperfectly, was how change actually happened.